Welcome back to Bookfulness, episode 17 today. If you joined us for our last deep dive, we spent our time looking at the structure of the tree of life, really figuring out how scientists build that huge map of ancestry. Today, well, we're taking the ultimate field trip. We're going to journey along that entire tree, tracing the history of life from its, earliest chemical beginnings all the way up to, well, us. We're talking 4 billion years here. And this massive deep dive comes straight from chapter 17 of our source material, The History of Life.
Yeah, our mission today is synthesis, really. Condensing this enormous span of biological history, we've got to focus on the moments that really mattered, the big evolutionary transitions like the first cell forming and those explosive diversifications that filled the planet, and of course the devastating mass extinctions that, repeatedly hit the reset button, shaping everything that came after.
4 billion years.
Mm.
It's almost impossible to really wrap your head around that scale. So we've broken it down into 6 kind of chronological parts for you. Let's start unpacking this history, beginning with the basics. Time itself and the rocks that hold all the clues. Oh, and just a reminder, as always, all the complex figures and tables we mentioned, they're all linked in the description. Definitely worth looking at.
Okay, so before we even get to life, we need to lay the groundwork. Earth's history. And the framework for that is the geologic timescale. It's quite a remarkable achievement, actually, because initially it was built without knowing any absolute dates. Geologists just used the relative ages of strata, layers of sediment laid down one after another.
Right, like younger stuff is on top of older stuff. Simple enough.
Exactly. And they used distinctive, short-lived fossils. These acted like evolutionary time markers, allowing them to match up layers across different continents, even without knowing the actual year.
But knowing something is older doesn't give you the number, the millions or billions of years. Yeah. That's where radiometric dating comes in, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's how we get the absolute ages. It's basically estimating time using the steady decay of radioactive elements found within those rocks. It's pretty amazing physics, really.
It is, and it lets us put those numbers on the timeline. When we talk about these huge scales, you'll hear us use Gaia, that's billion years ago, and Maya, million years ago.
And the sheer size of those numbers. It really hammers home how long life was just, well, simple microbes.
Absolutely. And this whole timeline, this history, it's happening on a stage that's constantly moving. We need to talk about plate tectonics.
Ah, yes, the continents drifting around.
Precisely. The Earth's solid crust, where all this history is recorded, it's broken into these massive plates, and they're floating, essentially, on a churning mobile mantle and asthenosphere below. You get new crust forming at mid-ocean ridges, and old crust gets recycled back down at subduction trenches. It's a dynamic system.
And why does this matter so much for, the history of life?
Well, it's fundamental. This movement is the engine driving biogeography, where life is found in evolution itself. Over billions of years, continents smashed together, broke apart. This constant shuffling aggregated smaller protocontinents into huge land masses. The most famous one, of course, is the supercontinent Pangaea, which formed about 300 million years ago.
And when land masses join up, life can mix. But when they break apart,
that's the key. Breakup means isolation. It creates new oceans, changes currents, alters climates dramatically, and critically, it creates opportunities for speciation as populations get geographically cut off from each other. It's a huge driver of diversity.
So to get a handle on this vast timeline, let's break it down like the source does in Table 17.1. We have the eons and eras. The vast majority of time before complex animals show up is the Precambrian. That covers the Hadean, Archean, and Proterozoic eons, ending about 541 million years ago. We're talking, nearly 90% of Earth's history?
Easily, yeah, about 88%. Almost everything else is crammed into the Phanerozoic eon, the time of visible life, and that's divided into the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic eras.
Okay, so let's pin down some key dates to keep in mind. Origin of life.
Estimated around 3.5 billion years ago, Gia, though there are chemical hints it might be even earlier. Then the big leap to eukaryotes are kind of complex cells.
Right. Plants, animals, fungi.
That happened much later, maybe 1.9 to 1.7 Gia, and the famous Cambrian boundary, the start of complex animal fossils everywhere, that's only 541 million years ago, Maya.
Wow. So that gap between 3.5 billion and just over half a billion years ago, it's enormous. Just microbes for almost all of history.
It really puts things in perspective. The microbial world ruled for an incredibly long time. #B, the emergence of life.
Okay, so the Earth stage is set, the geological clock is ticking. What about the spark, the origin of life itself? We need the building blocks first, right?
Exactly. And that brings us to the classic abiotic synthesis experiments. People often mention Stanley Miller's work from the 50s.
Yeah, the lightning in a bottle experiment.
Sort of, yeah. What those experiments showed was pretty powerful. Simple organic molecules, things like amino acids, sugars, the bases for DNA and RNA, purines, pyrimidines, they can actually form spontaneously. You just need basic compounds like methane, ammonia, hydrogen, water, and an energy source, like an electrical discharge mimicking lightning. So the basic ingredients were likely just, well, floating around on early Earth.
But making amino acids isn't the same as making life. There's that huge jump. And the central paradox, right? The chicken and egg problem.
The big one, yeah.
Yeah.
In all life we know today, nucleic acids, DNA, and RNA carry the information. They replicate. But they can't do it alone. They need protein enzymes to catalyze the process. And of course, those proteins are built using the instructions encoded in the nucleic acids. So which came first? You need proteins to make DNA, but you need DNA to make proteins.
It sounds impossible, which led scientists to the idea of the RNA world. I always found this idea incredibly elegant.
It really is a potential solution. The RNA world hypothesis suggests there was a stage way back where RNA did both jobs. It stored the genetic information, and because some RNA molecules can act as catalysts, we call them ribozymes, it could potentially self-replicate or at least catalyze key reactions.
So RNA could have been both the chicken and the egg, so to speak.
Essentially, yes. It could undergo a form of natural selection all on its own without needing complex protein machinery right away.
And there's actual lab evidence supporting this, isn't there? The source mentioned some experiments.
There is. Spiegelman's experiments back in the 60s were key. He showed that if you put different RNA sequences in a test tube with a simple replicating enzyme and the building blocks, the RNA sequences that happen to replicate faster quickly took over the population. That's selection right there at the molecular level.
Yeah.
And more recently, synthetic biology work has shown that ribozymes, these catalytic RNAs like an RNA ligase, can actually evolve in the lab. They can become more efficient at joining smaller RNA pieces together.
Okay, so the RNA world gets us started. But we don't live in an RNA world now. We have DNA, we have proteins doing most of the catalytic work. How did that transition happen?
That's still maybe the biggest unsolved puzzle in origin of life research. How did we get from an RNA-centric system to the DNA-protein world? It's murky. The leading hypothesis involves a kind of gradual handover. Maybe it started with amino acids latching on short RNA bits, acting as cofactors, helping the ribozymes work better.
Like little helpers.
Kind of. And over immense timescales, maybe that original RNA ribozyme evolved into the core of the ribosome, the protein-building machine in all cells. And maybe those little oligonucleotide cofactors became transfer RNA molecules that bring the amino acids. And the amino acid chains themselves eventually took over as the main catalysts, the proteins.
A slow co-evolutionary process.
That's the idea. A gradual transfer of responsibility from RNA to the more stable DNA for information storage and the more versatile proteins for catalysis.
And this whole chemical saga, this transition, it culminates in the very first major evolutionary transition that the source highlights, where these complex interacting molecules, RNA, proteins finally get packaged inside a membrane, a lipid bubble.
Exactly. That moment gives you the first true cell, a new, distinct level of biological organization, something that can control its own internal environment, compete, and evolve as a unit. A monumental step.
Right, so moving into the Precambrian, we're talking the Archean and Proterozoic eons. Basically, everything before 541 million years ago. Over 3 billion years of history dominated entirely by single-celled life, the hidden world.
So what's the first actual evidence? Not just chemical hints, but tangible signs of life.
The oldest direct evidence we generally point to dates back to about 3.4, maybe 3.5 billion years ago. These are structures preserved in rock called stromatolites.
Stromatolites. Okay, what are they exactly? They're not quite fossils of individual cells, but rather layered mounds. Think of them like microbial mats stacked layer upon layer, formed by dense colonies of photosynthesizing prokaryotes, mostly cyanobacteria. And what's really compelling is you can go to places like Shark Bay in Australia today, these warm, shallow seas, and see almost identical layered structures forming right now from cyanobacteria mats. So they're like geological fossils of microbial activity.
Living fossils, almost.
In a structural sense, yeah. And there are even older carbon deposits, maybe 3.8 Gaia, that have certain isotopic signatures suggesting biological activity, but the stromatolites are more definitive physical structures.
Okay, so we have early life, photosynthesizing, and photosynthesis produces oxygen, which leads to one of the biggest environmental shifts in Earth's history.
Absolutely monumental. The Great Oxidation Event, or GOE. You have to remember, the early Earth's atmosphere had basically no free oxygen. It was anoxic.
Hard to imagine now.
Right. These cyanobacteria started pumping out oxygen as a waste product from photosynthesis. For maybe 1 billion years or more, that oxygen didn't really build up in the atmosphere. It reacted with dissolved iron in the oceans.
Making rust, essentially.
Pretty much. It formed these massive deposits called banded iron formations, layers of iron oxides on the ocean floor. But eventually, all the readily available iron was used up. The sinks got saturated.
And then the oxygen started escaping into the atmosphere.
Exactly. It started bubbling up, accumulating. And this caused a massive global environmental shift. We have to stress for most life existing at the time, which was anaerobic, oxygen was toxic, a poison.
So this gift of oxygen was actually a catastrophe for most existing life.
Probably the biggest extinction event ever in terms of the proportion of biomass wiped out. It forced anaerobic life into hiding, into oxygen-poor refuges like deep mud or hydrothermal vents where some still live today. But it also paved the way for a new kind of metabolism, aerobic respiration. Using oxygen to extract energy is way more efficient, and it led to the formation of the ozone layer, shielding the surface from harmful UV radiation.
Which would be pretty critical for life eventually moving onto land much, much later.
Absolutely critical. The GOE fundamentally reshaped the planet's chemistry and set the stage for all the complex life that followed, driven entirely by tiny microbes changing their world.
Okay, so the planet is now oxygenated, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
What's the next big leap in complexity? We're still dealing with simple cells at this point.
The next giant leap is the origin of eukaryotes. These are the complex cells that make up pretty much all visible life animals, plants, fungi, protists. This happened somewhere around 1.9 to 1.7 billion years ago.
And what makes a eukaryote so different from the simpler prokaryotes, like bacteria and archaea?
Several key things. Eukaryotes have internal membrane-bound structures, most famously a nucleus to house their DNA, which is organized into multiple linear chromosomes, unlike the single circular chromosome typical of prokaryotes. They also have a complex internal scaffolding called a cytoskeleton, and crucially, specialized compartments called organelles, things like mitochondria and, in plants, chloroplasts.
Mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, right? Where do these organelles come from?
The prevailing and really well-supported theory is endosymbiosis. The idea is that a larger host cell, maybe an early archaeon, engulfed a smaller prokaryote, probably an alpha proteobacterium in the case of mitochondria.
Engulfed it, but didn't digest it.
Exactly. Instead of being eaten, the smaller cell started living inside the host in a mutually beneficial relationship, a symbiosis. The engulfed bacterium provided a huge energy boost through aerobic respiration, becoming the mitochondrion. The host provided protection and resources.
And a similar process happened later with cyanobacteria becoming chloroplasts in the plant lineage.
That's right, a separate, later endosymbiotic event.
Why was getting mitochondria such a game changer? You mentioned energy.
It's almost all about energy. Prokaryotes generate energy mainly across their outer membrane. That fundamentally limits their size and complexity because the surface area to volume ratio drops as they get bigger. But when a host cell acquired mitochondria, suddenly it had potentially thousands of tiny internal power plants, vastly increasing the surface area dedicated to energy production. This massive energy surplus, orders of magnitude more ATP, is what allowed eukaryotes to support much larger genomes, complex internal machinery, active transport, and eventually multicellularity.
So without mitochondria, no complex life as we know it.
Pretty much, it was a prerequisite for everything that followed.
Okay, which brings us to the next level of organization. Multicellularity. Going from single complex cells to coordinated groups of cells. Was this a one-time event?
Not at all. That's a key point the source emphasizes. Multicellularity has evolved independently many times, dozens, maybe hundreds of times across the tree of life.
Really? Like where?
Oh, in animals, obviously. In plants. In fungi, multiple times. In red algae, brown algae, green algae, it's popped up all over the place.
So if it evolved so many times, does that mean the basic toolkit for being multicellular was already there in single-celled eukaryotes?
That seems to be the case. The genes needed for cells to stick together, adhesion, communicate with each other, and coordinate their behavior during development. Many of those genes were already present in their unicellular ancestors, perhaps doing other jobs.
So it wasn't necessarily inventing brand new genes, but repurposing existing ones.
Exactly. Environmental pressures or evolutionary opportunities just needed to favor cells staying together after division, forming colonies, and eventually specializing. The genetic potential was largely there.
Okay, we're finally leaving the vast Precambrian behind. We crossed the boundary into the Paleozoic era, starting with the Cambrian period. But just before that explosion of familiar life, there's this enigmatic period called the Ediacaran, roughly 635 to 541 million years ago.
And this is where we find the first really large, complex fossils, the Ediacaran fauna. Yes, but they're weird, really strange. Many of them look like quilted, flat, mattress-like things. Some were frond-like, others disc-shaped. Often they don't seem to have obvious mouths, guts, or limbs.
So what were they? Early animals.
That's the interpretation,
Yeah.
yes. Inferred early lineages of sponges, maybe cnidarians, like jellyfish relatives, and perhaps some very basal bilaterians animals with a left and right side. But their exact relationship to the animals that came later in the Cambrian is still hotly debated. Some might have been evolutionary dead ends.
Interesting. So a sort of early experiment in multicellular animal life before the main event.
Yeah.
Where did animals themselves come from, though? What's their closest single-celled relative?
That's much clearer. The closest living relatives to all animals, the metazoa, are a group of unicellular or colonial protists called the choanoflagellates.
Choanoflagellates. And why them?
Well, morphologically, they look remarkably like the feeding cells, the choanocytes, found in modern sponges, which are very basal animals. And critically, molecular data comparing genomes shows that choanoflagellates share many genes with animals that are crucial for things like cell adhesion, cell-to-cell signaling, and developmental processes.
So again, the genetic toolkit for animal multicellularity was largely present in their single-celled ancestors.
Exactly. The leap from a choanoflagellate colony to something like a simple sponge seems much more plausible when you realize the underlying genetic machinery was already there. Hashtag B, the Cambrian explosion, 541 Maya.
Okay, now for the main event, the Cambrian explosion. This always sounds so incredibly dramatic. Starting 541 million years ago, what actually happened?
It was dramatic, geologically speaking. It refers to a relatively short interval, maybe 20, 30 million years, which is short in geological terms, where the fossil record suddenly shows the appearance of almost all the major animal phyla we recognize today.
All at once. Phyla are the really big groupings, right? Like arthropods, mollusks, chordates.
Exactly, the major body plans. Sponges and cnidarians were already around, but suddenly you get arthropods, like trilobites, mollusks, echinoderms, starfish relatives, brachiopods, early chordates, all showing up in the fossil record in a geological blink of an eye.
Especially the bilateria, right? The animals with heads and tails, left and right sides.
Yes, the diversification of the bilateria is really the core of the Cambrian explosion. Animals with bilateral symmetry, a distinct head end with concentrated senses, often a gut, muscles, a nervous system, maybe even a brain. This rapid appearance of so many complex body plans is still considered one of the biggest questions in evolution.
Why did it happen? What triggered this explosion?
Well, there's no single agreed upon answer. It was likely a combination of factors. Several leading hypotheses get discussed.
Okay, like what?
One possibility is environmental triggers. Maybe a significant rise in atmospheric oxygen levels finally reached a threshold that allowed for larger, more active, energy-demanding bodies. Or maybe changes in ocean chemistry, like increased calcium, made it easier to build shells and skeletons.
Hard parts. That seems important.
Very. Which leads to another hypothesis, the evolution of predation. Once animals started evolving shells, exoskeletons, teeth, it kicked off an evolutionary arms race. Predators evolved ways to crack shells, prey evolved better defenses, predators evolved better senses to find prey. This kind of co-evolutionary pressure can drive rapid diversification and innovation.
Makes sense. Any other ideas?
Another major factor could be genetic innovation, specifically the evolution and duplication of key developmental genes, particularly the Hox genes. These are master control genes that determine the basic body plan, where the head goes, where limbs form, etc. Maybe tweaking these genetic toolkits allowed for the rapid generation of new body forms.
So environment, genetics, and ecological interactions all playing a role.
Most likely, yes, a perfect storm of factors coming together.
And we see the results immediately in the fossils, like the famous trilobites.
Oh yeah. Trilobites are iconic Cambrian fossils. They were incredibly diverse arthropods, filling many ecological roles. They become so common and evolve so rapidly that they're used as key index fossils to date Cambrian rocks worldwide.
And we also see the first hints of our own lineage, vertebrates.
We do. Towards the later part of shavings appeared, but the first definitive vertebrates show up soon after, the ostracoderms.
Ostracoderms, what were they like?
Jawless, fish-like creatures, but they were covered in heavy, bony armor plates. They didn't have paired fins like most later fish. They represent the first major vertebrate diversification, relying on this external bony skeleton for protection. That vertebrate invention bone was clearly a successful strategy. Hashtag C. Post-Cambrian diversification and extinction. So the Cambrian sets the stage with all the major body plans. The next period, the Ordovician, roughly 495-443 Maya, saw these phyla really diversify within themselves.
So filling in the details.
Exactly. This is sometimes called the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event. You get lots of new classes and orders appearing, leading to much more complex marine ecosystems than in the Cambrian.
What did these Ordovician seas look like? Who were the big players?
They were bustling. You had large predators emerging like early sea stars and especially the giant nautiloids. These were shelled cephalopods, relatives of modern nautilus, but some were huge meters long. They were likely the top predators.
Wow.
And you also see the first really extensive, complex reefs being built, not by modern corals, but by extinct groups of corals, along with sponges, cyanobacteria, and other organisms. These reefs created intricate habitats, fueling further specialization.
Sounds like a thriving time. But, as seems to be the pattern, good times don't last forever in deep history. The Ordovician ended badly.
It ended with a major crisis, a massive mass extinction event. In terms of the percentage of marine families lost, it might be the second largest of all time, after the Permian extinction we'll get to later.
What caused it?
The leading hypothesis points to global cooling. A relatively rapid drop in temperature led to widespread glaciation, possibly centered over the supercontinent Gondwana, which was near the South Pole then.
And glaciation means sea levels drop.
Exactly. As water gets locked up in huge ice sheets, sea levels plummet. This would have devastated the shallow, warm, continental shelf seas where most of this diversification had happened. Loss of habitat, combined with the cold, likely drove the extinction.
So another example of that pattern. Huge diversification, followed by a sudden, massive loss due to environmental change.
It's a recurring theme throughout the history of life. Extinction resets the board and creates new opportunities.
Okay, after the Ordovician extinction and recovery, life starts looking towards a new frontier, the land. This really kicks off in the Silurian period, around 443-419 Mia. Moving on land must have been incredibly difficult.
Immense challenges. You've got gravity to deal with no buoyancy from water. You've got the constant threat of drying out desiccation. You need new ways to reproduce without water and new ways to breathe air instead of extracting oxygen from water.
So who made the first moves? Plants.
Plants were definitely among the pioneers. We see the first fossils of terrestrial vascular plants appearing. These plants had evolved specialized tissues, xylem and phloem, to transport water internally and provide structural support to stand upright. Early forms included things related to modern club mosses and ferns, eventually leading to lycophyte trees in the next period.
They started building the first land ecosystems. What about animals?
The first animals to make the leap seem to have been arthropods. We find fossils of early terrestrial mites and scorpion-like creatures from the Silurian. They already had exoskeletons providing support and jointed limbs suitable for walking. They just needed to adapt their respiratory systems, evolving things like book lungs or trachea.
So plants and bugs were the first landlubbers. This leads us into the Devonian period, 419-359 Maya, which is often called the Age of Fishes.
That's right. Fish diversity in the oceans absolutely exploded during the Devonian, especially the bony fishes. You get sharks diversifying too. Pretty much all major fish groups established themselves then.
But crucially for us, something important was happening within one group of fishes.
The lobe-finned fishes, yes.
Oh.
While ray-finned fishes became the dominant group in water, it was the lobe-finned fishes that held the evolutionary potential to move onto land. Their fleshy, muscular fins had a different internal bone structure.
A structure that could eventually become limbs.
Precisely. And it's within this group that the ancestors of all terrestrial vertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals arose during the Devonian. #B. From fish to tetrapod.
Okay, this transition fish to tetrapod, the four-limbed vertebrate, is one of the most iconic and well-documented in the fossil record, isn't it? We actually have the intermediate fossils.
We really do. It's a beautiful example of evolutionary transition.
Yeah.
We can trace the changes step by step. The star fossil here is Tiktaalik.
Tiktaalik, found in the Canadian Arctic, right? Sometimes called a fish pod.
Exactly. It's technically a tetrapodomorph, meaning it's on the lineage leading to tetrapods, but still retains many fish features. It's a perfect mosaic, filling the gap between fully aquatic lobe-finned fish like Eusthenopteron and the earliest true amphibians with limbs like Acanthostega or Ichthyostega.
So what makes Tiktaalik so special? What are its features?
Well, let's look at its head. Unlike a typical fish, its skull was flattened, more like an early tetrapod. And crucially, it had lost the bony gill cover, the operculum, that connects the skull to the shoulder girdle in fish.
Why is losing the gill cover important?
It means Tiktaalik could lift its head slightly and move it independently from its body. Think about propping your head up in shallow water or on a mud flat. It also had robust, overlapping ribs, suggesting it could support its body weight out of the water, at least partially.
Okay, makes sense. And the famous fins to limbs part.
That's the most striking feature. Its forelimb, or fin, had the same basic bone structure as our arm. A single upper bone, humerus, two forearm bones, radius and ulna, and then a cluster of smaller bones corresponding to the wrist.
So the blueprint for our arm was already there in the fin.
It was. The difference was at the very end. Tiktaalik still had fin rays, not distinct fingers or toes. But the insight highlighted in the source is how tetrapod digits likely evolved. They probably arose from those many small radial bones already present at the end of the lobe-finned fish fin.
So evolution didn't just conjure fingers out of nowhere. It repurposed and modified existing fin bones.
Exactly. It co-opted existing structures, strengthening some, reducing others, to transform a propulsive fin into a weight-bearing mobile limb, a classic example of evolutionary tinkering.
Amazing. So vertebrates are now firmly on land. We move into the Carboniferous period, 359 to 99 Maya. What's happening geologically and ecologically?
Geologically, continents continued to merge, forming the southern supercontinent Gondwana and smaller northern landmasses. Climate-wise, large parts of the world were warm and wet, leading to the development of vast swamp forests.
Coal forests.
Precisely. Dominated by giant tree ferns, club mosses, lycophytes, and horsetails. It's the buried remains of these immense forests that formed the coal deposits we exploit today. Amphibians were diverse and often large in these swamps.
And what about plant evolution? Any big innovations after vascular tissue?
The next huge innovation, really gaining ground in the Carboniferous, was the seed. This was revolutionary for plants.
How so? What's the advantage of a seed?
Earlier plants, like ferns, needed water for fertilization. Their sperm had to swim to the egg. Seed plants developed two key things: pollen, often wind-dispersed, which carries the male gametes, eliminating the need for swimming sperm, and the seed itself. A seed packages the embryo together with a food supply, all inside a protective coat. This allows the embryo to survive harsh conditions like drought and disperse over long distances.
So it freed plants from being tied to wet environments for reproduction.
Completely. It allowed seed plants to colonize drier habitats and eventually dominate terrestrial ecosystems. And this changing landscape, with seed plants spreading, also coincided with the appearance of the first reptiles.
Ah, reptiles. What made them different from the amphibians?
The key reptilian innovation was the amniotic egg. Like the seed for plants, the amniotic egg provided a self-contained aquatic environment for the developing embryo, with a protective shell and membranes to prevent drying out. This meant reptiles were the first vertebrates fully liberated from needing to return to water to breed. They could conquer the land completely. Okay, leaving the Paleozoic behind, we enter the Mesozoic era, the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods, roughly 252 to 66 million years ago. Geologically, this era is all about breakup.
The breakup of Pangaea.
Exactly. The supercontinent Pangaea, which had fully assembled by the end of the Paleozoic, started to rift apart during the Triassic and Jurassic. First, it split into a northern continent, Laurasia, and a southern one, Gondwana. Then those continued to fragment.
Creating the Atlantic Ocean, for instance.
Yes, the North Atlantic opened up, then the South Atlantic. India broke away from Gondwana and started its long journey north. Australia and Antarctica separated. This gradual continental drift led towards the configuration we see today.
And the evolutionary consequence of all this splitting is isolation.
Isolation is key. As continents drifted apart, populations got separated by oceans. This geographic isolation is a major engine of speciation. You get unique evolutionary trajectories on different landmasses. Think about the unique marsupials of Australia, a result of its long isolation.
Right. And it also must have dramatically changed ocean currents and climate patterns globally.
Absolutely. A completely different world map means different heat transport, different rainfall patterns. Meanwhile, in the oceans themselves, another major event was unfolding: the Mesozoic Marine Revolution.
What does that mean? A revolution in the sea.
It refers to a significant increase in the complexity and intensity of interactions in marine ecosystems. You see a rise in shell-crushing predators like crabs and certain fish. In response, prey animals like mollusks evolved thicker shells, spines, or behaviors like burrowing deeper.
Another arms race, but underwater.
Pretty much. It led to the decline of some older, less defended groups and the rise of others. This is also the era when modern reef-building corals, scleractinians, appeared and became dominant, and importantly, the teleost fishes began their massive diversification.
Teleost, that's most modern bony fish,
A
right?
vast majority, yeah. Their radiation really took off in the Mesozoic, leading to the incredible diversity of fish we see today. Hashtag B, dinosaurs, birds, and plants.
Okay, but let's be honest. When people think Mesozoic, they think one thing: dinosaurs. The age of reptiles.
Absolutely. Reptiles, having survived the Permian extinction relatively well, diversified spectacularly. We distinguished two major lineages diverging early on: the synapsids, which were mammal-like reptiles and include the lineage that eventually led to us, mammals.
And the diapsids.
Right. The diapsids include lizards, snakes, crocodiles, and of course the dinosaurs. And dinosaurs became the dominant large terrestrial animals for well over 150 million years.
An incredible reign. We know the famous groups: the giant long-necked sauropods, the big two-legged carnivores, the theropods like T-Rex, the armored ones, the horned ones like ceratopsians, triceratops,
An amazing diversity of forms and sizes, occupying almost every terrestrial niche.
and one group of theropod dinosaurs didn't entirely disappear, did they? The source material is very clear. Birds are dinosaurs.
That's the scientific consensus now, yes. Based on overwhelming fossil evidence, especially from China in recent decades, birds are living theropod dinosaurs.
What's the evidence? What features link them so strongly?
Numerous shared derived characters, features unique to that group. Things like hollow, pneumatic bones, the structure of the foot, typically 3 main toes forward, 1 back, the presence of a furcula or wishbone, which is formed by fused collarbones, clavicles, even details like a reduced outer leg bone, the fibula. Extinct theropods like Velociraptor or Deinonychus share these features with birds.
And feathers.
And feathers. Many non-avian dinosaur fossils now show clear evidence of feathers, ranging from simple filaments to complex structures, very similar to modern bird feathers. Feathers clearly evolved in dinosaurs long before flight.
Which brings us to the iconic transitional fossil, Archaeopteryx, from the late Jurassic.
Archaeopteryx is still a fantastic example of a mosaic fossil. It had fully developed feathers arranged for flight like a modern bird, but it also retained very clear reptilian theropod features: teeth in its beak, claws on its wing fingers, and a long, bony tail, unlike the fused tail structure, pygostyle, of modern birds.
A perfect snapshot of evolution in action.
Exactly. It beautifully demonstrates that birds didn't just appear fully formed, they evolved step by step from theropod ancestors.
While dinosaurs ruled the land, what was happening with plants? We mentioned seed plants taking over in the Paleozoic.
Gymnosperms, things like conifers, cycads, ginkgos, were dominant through much of the Mesozoic. But the really big event in plant evolution during this era was the origin and rise of the angiosperms, the flowering plants.
Flowering plants. They seem to have come out of nowhere and taken over.
Their origin might be deeper in the Mesozoic, maybe Triassic or Jurassic, based on molecular clocks, but they really start to diversify and become ecologically important in the Cretaceous period. And their success was explosive.
Why were they so successful?
Several potential advantages. Flowers attracted animal pollinators, primarily insects at first. This is often much more efficient than relying on wind pollination like most gymnosperms. They also evolved fruits, which aid in seed dispersal by animals. And they often have faster life cycles and more efficient water transport systems, vessels.
So they outcompeted the gymnosperms in many environments.
They eventually did, yes. By the end of the Cretaceous, angiosperms were becoming the dominant plants in many ecosystems, setting the stage for the modern world's flora, #C, the mammalian origin and mass extinctions. Now, while all this dinosaur and angiosperm action was going on, another group was quietly evolving in the background: the mammals.
Descendants of those synapsid reptiles from earlier.
Exactly. The first true mammals appear in the fossil record around the same time as the first dinosaurs, back in the Triassic. And the lineages leading to the two major living groups, the marsupials, pouched mammals, and the placentals, like us, with a placenta, diverged and started diversifying during the Cretaceous period.
But they weren't dominant then, were they?
Not at all. For the entire Mesozoic, mammals remained generally small, probably nocturnal, likely insectivorous or eating small vertebrates. They lived in the shadows of the dinosaurs, ecologically speaking, biding their time, as you said earlier.
Okay, so the Mesozoic saw the reign of dinosaurs, the rise of birds and flowering plants, and the quiet origins of mammals. But the era is bookended by two massive catastrophes. The first one actually marks the start of the Mesozoic, the end Permian extinction, about 252 million years ago.
This was the Great Dying, by far the largest mass extinction event in Earth's history. It was absolutely devastating, especially for marine life. Estimates are that maybe 96% of all marine species went extinct.
96%, that's almost unimaginable.
It is. Terrestrial life was also hit incredibly hard. Maybe 70% of vertebrate species lost. It fundamentally reset life on Earth.
What could cause something that catastrophic?
The leading suspect is massive, prolonged volcanic activity in what's now the Siberian Traps eruptions. These eruptions would have released enormous amounts of greenhouse gases, leading to runaway global warming. They also likely caused widespread acid rain and triggered chemical changes in the oceans, leading to anoxia, lack of oxygen, a cascade of environmental disasters.
And this wiped the slate clean, allowing the reptiles that survived to diversify and dominate the Mesozoic.
That's exactly right. It created an ecological vacuum that dinosaurs and other reptile groups rapidly filled.
Then at the other end of the Mesozoic, 66 million years ago, another famous catastrophe, the KPG extinction, Cretaceous Paleogene.
The one that got the dinosaurs, well, the non-avian ones.
Right. This one seems more sudden. What happened here?
The evidence is now overwhelming that the primary trigger was the impact of a large asteroid or comet, about 10 kilometers wide, which struck the Earth near the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, creating the Chicxulub crater.
And the impact itself wasn't the main killer.
The immediate effects, giant tsunamis, earthquakes, heat pulse, would have been devastating locally, but the global killer was likely the aftermath. Huge amounts of dust and aerosols thrown into the atmosphere would have blocked sunlight for months, maybe years.
An impact winter.
Exactly. This would have caused photosynthesis to collapse, both on land and in the oceans, leading to the collapse of food webs. Global temperatures would have plummeted initially, followed by longer-term warming from released CO2. It was a rapid, severe global environmental shock.
And who died out? Obviously the big dinosaurs.
All non-avian dinosaurs, yes. Also the pterosaurs, flying reptiles, the large marine reptiles like plesiosaurs and mosasaurs. In the oceans, the ammonites, which had been diverse cephalopods throughout the Mesozoic, disappeared completely. Many plankton groups were decimated. It was selective smaller animals, freshwater animals, and things that could perhaps shelter or eat detritus tended to fare better.
Including mammals.
Including mammals, and birds, of course. This event marks the sharp boundary between the Mesozoic era and the Cenozoic era, our current era.
So the KPG impact clears the board 66 million years ago. We enter the Cenozoic era, this is often called the Age of Mammals, and things start to look much more familiar.
They do. The flora and fauna become increasingly recognizable as related to modern forms. But the planet itself wasn't finished changing. Continental drift continued.
What were the major final moves?
While Australia finally separated completely from Antarctica and moved north. India completed its journey and slammed into Asia, a massive collision that's still ongoing and is responsible for uplifting the Himalayas.
Incredible forces involved there.
Absolutely. And a very significant event, relatively recently in geological terms, was the formation of the Isthmus of Panama, fully connecting North and South America only about 2.8 million years ago.
That late. Wow. And that had big biological consequences.
Huge! It allowed the great American biotic interchange, massive migrations of animals between the two continents, leading to extinctions and new ecological mixes. It also significantly changed ocean circulation patterns between the Atlantic and Pacific.
And what about climate during the Cenozoic? Was it stable?
Far from it. There was a general cooling and drying trend through much of the Cenozoic, particularly after a warm peak in the early Eocene. This cooling and drying led to the expansion of grasslands and savannas, particularly in the Miocene epoch. This fundamentally changed terrestrial ecosystems and drove the evolution of grazing mammals.
But the most dramatic climate shift came right at the end, relatively speaking, the ice ages.
Yes, the Pleistocene epoch, starting about 2.6 million years ago and running until about 11,700 years ago. This period was characterized by repeated, dramatic cycles of global cooling and glaciation.
Not just one ice age, but many.
Exactly. About 11 major interglacial cycles are recognized, maybe more. Huge continental ice sheets repeatedly advanced over North America and Eurasia, then retreated during warmer interglacial periods, like the one we're in now. These cycles have profound effects on life. Hashtag BB, the adaptive radiation of mammals.
Okay, back to the mammals. The classic story is dinosaurs go extinct, then mammals radiate and take over all the ecological niches. How does the source material reflecting current science view this adaptive radiation?
It's actually a bit more complicated and debated than that simple story suggests. There's a fascinating tension between the fossil record and molecular clock data.
How so? What does the fossil record show?
The fossil record generally shows a major burst of diversification among mammals after the KPG boundary. Most of the modern orders, primates, rodents, bats, carnivores, ungulates, hoofed mammals, elephants, their fossils first appear relatively quickly in the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, just after the extinction. This strongly suggests the extinction event opened up ecological space, allowing mammals to radiate into roles previously held by dinosaurs.
Okay, that fits the classic story. But the molecular data tells a different tale.
Somewhat, yes. Molecular clock studies, which estimate divergence times based on the rate of genetic mutations, often suggest that the initial splits between the lineages leading to many of these modern orders actually occurred much earlier.
Like before the extinction.
Yes, potentially deep within the Cretaceous period, maybe 80 million years ago or even earlier.
Yeah.
This suggests that the major mammalian groups might have already started diverging while the dinosaurs were still around.
So if they were already diverging, what role did the extinction play?
The thinking is that the KPG extinction might not have triggered the initial splitting of lineages, but it acted as a crucial ecological release. It wiped out the dominant competitors, the dinosaurs, and allowed these pre-existing mammalian lineages, which had survived, to finally diversify ecologically to increase in size, explore new diets, occupy new habitats, and become much more abundant.
So the diversification rate might not have spiked immediately after the extinction, but the ecological opportunities certainly did.
Precisely. It allowed the survivors to fill the vacuum. So whether it was triggering new lineages or releasing existing ones, the result was the same. The Cenozoic became the age of mammals, with incredible adaptive radiations leading to the diverse forms we see today, from bats to whales to us. #C, the Pleistocene and species distribution. Finally, let's come back to those Pleistocene ice ages. They might seem recent, but they had a profound impact on shaping the distribution of species we see today.
How did repeated glaciation affect where species live now?
Two main mechanisms. First, sea level changes. During peak glacial periods, so much water was locked up in ice sheets that global sea levels dropped dramatically by 100 meters or even more.
That would expose a lot of land that's currently underwater.
Exactly. It created land bridges. The most famous is the Bering Land Bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska. This was exposed repeatedly, allowing animals like mammoths, bison, horses, camels, and eventually humans to migrate between Asia and North America. Similar land bridges connected Britain to Europe and parts of Southeast Asia, Sunda, to islands that are now separate.
So it allowed for massive dispersal events. What's the second mechanism?
Fragmentation and refugia. As the ice sheets advanced south, they forced plants and animals to move ahead of them. Temperate and boreal species were pushed far south of their current ranges, but they couldn't always just move smoothly. Often, populations became isolated in pockets of suitable habitat that remained ice-free and relatively warm, called refugia. Think of mountainous areas in southern Europe or parts of the southeastern U.S.
So species got trapped in these isolated pockets during the cold periods.
Yes. Then, during the warmer interglacial periods, they would disperse out from these refugia again, only to be forced back or into different refugia during the next glacial cycle. This repeated fragmentation, isolation, dispersal, and local extinction had huge genetic consequences.
Leading to divergence between populations.
Absolutely. Populations isolated in different refugia for tens of thousands of years would start to diverge genetically. When they expanded and met again, they might be different enough to be considered distinct subspecies or even species. The source gives a great example with certain beetles. There are species today found only in widely separated areas like Siberia and North Africa. Their current distribution makes no sense based on today's climate, but it reflects their history of being widespread during glacial periods and then surviving only in these distant refugia.
So the Ice Ages acted like a giant species pump, constantly shuffling distributions and driving genetic divergence.
Exactly. Much of the geographic pattern of genetic variation we see within species today is a direct legacy of these Pleistocene events. History really matters for understanding present-day biodiversity. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, that was quite the journey. 4 billion years condensed.
Yeah.
We went from uh, basically chemical reactions in an abiotic soup, possibly leading to an RNA world, through the incredible energy revolution of endosymbiosis.
The multiple independent inventions of multicellular life, the drama of the Cambrian explosion setting the stage for animal diversity.
That amazing transition onto land, perfectly captured by fossils like Tiktaalik, the rise and fall of the dinosaurs, the dawn of mammals and flowering plants.
And punctuated all along by these massive environmental shifts and devastating mass extinctions, constantly reshaping the biosphere, right up to the recent ice ages, sculpting modern distributions.
It really highlights the sheer dynamism of life's history. You see these bursts of incredible diversification like the Cambrian, but also how evolution constantly tinkers, building on what's already there, like fins becoming limbs.
Yeah, and it's not just slow, gradual change. It's this interplay between gradual adaptation and these sudden, often catastrophic environmental jolts, oxygen, asteroid impacts, ice ages that really steer the course.
And realizing that where species live today is so deeply shaped by these ancient events, continental drift, ancient climate changes, ice age refugia, it really sets up our next topic perfectly. Next time, we're shifting focus from the when of life's history to the where. Why are kangaroos only in Australia? Why are lemurs only in Madagascar? We'll explore the geography of evolution, looking at how history and ecology combine to determine species ranges and global patterns of biodiversity.
It's a fascinating field. So thanks for tuning into Bookfulness for this deep dive through time. We hope you'll join us for the next episode.